Hello, and welcome back to Ross Taylor Woodworks. This time we have a mahogany table, circa 1830. Severely damaged on the top from sun. This table was previously refinished. I believe it's got a lacquer finish on it. So just going to do a quick test with some denatured alcohol. The test is just slightly inconclusive. If it was a lacquer finish, I would expect it to be a little bit more white. This could very well be a polyurethane finish. We'll know better when we strip the finish. Okay, here I'm flipping the table over, getting ready to take it apart. I'm going to mark the base so I know which way it goes back together. I can't get the screws out. I'm going to use my impact driver and quickly take those screws right out. And I'm marking the screws, putting a piece of tape on them. I just discovered something very unusual, the way this is hinged on. It's got 4 hinges on one side and 3 on the other. On the frame I marked the screws with a Sharpie, but since we're going to be stripping here, I'm going to mark these screws with an awl. I'm going to make marks and then take the screws out. Okay, now I'm going to apply some paste stripper. This is the citrus-based stripper. Going to put on a nice thick coat and let it sit for a few hours. A clear finish like this just takes a few hours. Now this is a polyurethane finish, so this may be a little more difficult to get off. Okay, I've let that sit for a few hours. And I'm using a cabinet scraper to take off the finish. And I can tell there's going to be some stubborn spots. Probably could have let it sit a little longer. Now I'm going to take some lacquer thinner and start scrubbing it down and try to get the rest of the finish off. And I can already see there's some spots that are going to need more treatment. Wipe off all the gunk with paper towels. And you can clearly see there's going to be some spots that need a little more work. I'm going to try one more pass with the lacquer thinner, but I don't think it's going to be enough. Yeah, we're going to need another application of the paste stripper. Alright, finished the stripping, and the sun left some uneven spots in the top. A big dark spot here and here. So I'm first going to try some sanding. I'm going to start with 100 grit paper. See if we can even out the color. This top was previously sanded and refinished. So we don't have to worry about an original surface here. It's already been removed. Right here I'm doing a pass with 100 grit paper. Starting to improve. The dark spots were the original color. And the lighter areas were the bleached out area. So the sanding took down the bleached area and brought it down to the original color. And that'll start to look even better once we get through the next couple of grits of sandpaper. Okay, I went through 120 and 150, and now I'm doing a final hand sand with the grain with 150 grit. Okay, now we're down in the finishing room, and I'm getting ready to stain the top. First, just wiping it off with some lacquer thinner. Now I'm using the yellow can red mahogany stain. Just brush a nice thick coat on, and then immediately wipe it down. Wipe off all the excess, and rub it into the wood. Okay, I've put a few coats of shellac on. Now the next step is to scuff sand it, and then do some steel wool, and then tack off all the dust. Then after that I'm ready to top coat with a water-based polyurethane. And before I do that, I strain it into a clean container. There's sometimes some lumps in the finish. Get a much smoother finish if you strain the finish. Now with the water-based polyurethane, lay it on in a nice even coat. Try to get full coverage. Make sure you don't have any skips. And the next thing is to start tipping off. And the first pass, I do kind of a heavy brushing. Pressing the brush to even out the finish and remove some excess. And in the final pass, I do a very light tip. Then clean up the edges. And then what I do is bounce the top up and down to settle out the finish. Okay, gonna let that dry overnight, and then scuff sand, blow off the dust, and ready for second coat. Okay, let that cure for about a week. Finish is nice and smooth, but there are a few little air bubbles in the finish. It's almost inevitable. So now we're going to do a wet sanding, a very light wet sanding with some naphtha and some 320 wet dry paper. I've got the paper wrapped around a sanding sponge. This is going to be a very light sanding just to remove those little air bubbles. Then wipe off the naphtha. The naphtha dries very quickly. And you can see some dull spots and shiny spots. Now the next thing is to rub it down with steel wool, 4/0 steel wool, till you remove all of the shiny spots. Get an even sheen. And the final step is to rub it with paste wax. Once again, 4/0 steel wool. And then buff out the wax with a towel. Okay, here we have that table all done. As you remember, the top was severely damaged by sun. Stripped the finish. It was a polyurethane finish. Sanded, stained. A few coats of shellac, and then a water-based poly on top of that, and then rubbed it down and waxed it. It's here as well, touch up, a little bit of veneer repair. And the casters, I had to do some repairs on the casters as well. Looks fantastic.